When Rico approached me to come up with a list of films to recommend for Halloween, I said, well, I'm going to go beyond just the normal titles that we're used to seeing. Seems like you can't turn around without seeing either Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, those franchises, the remakes of those franchises. My goodness, there's so much more to the world of horror than just American cinema. And I want to turn you on now to 13 titles of international horror films that I think you'll appreciate. The first one, kind of a gentle introduction, if you will, to the genre. It's the film Theatre of Blood from 1973, a British production directed by Douglas Hickox and starring Vincent Price. This is a wonderful film. It is the story of an actor who has been passed over for years by the critics for all of his performances of Shakespeare. He commits suicide publicly in front of them, actually survives the attempt, and comes back to exact revenge on all of these critics who have ruined his career. But the way he chooses to do it is by reenacting famous death scenes from Shakespearean dramas. It's a wonderful film, packed full of not only references to great literature, but with a grand guignol sense of comedy to it as well. A definite recommendation if you haven't checked it out already. The next film I'd like to recommend is also a little on the tame side, also with literary references. It's a 1984 film by the Irish director Neil Jordan, the movie The Company of Wolves, starring Angela Lansbury. In this film, it's a retelling of the Little Red Riding Hood story. I think they do about 4 or 5 variations of it. Actually, the source material is from Angela Carter, the famous British writer who specialized in taking old fairy tales, folk stories, and readapting them to more contemporary times. Here we have warnings of the danger of straying from the path, and beware of men whose eyebrows meet in the middle. A very fairy tale-like production. As I said, it may seem rather gentle, yet it finds a way to get under your skin. A big recommendation for The Company of Wolves. Up next on my list is a film from Japan. I know Asian horror has become popular ever since the late 1990s. We've had remakes of Ringu over here. It's now The Ring. The Grudge was originally from Japan as well. But I want to take us back to 1964, to a little film made by Kenito Shindo called Onibaba. This simple tale is all about 2 women, a mother and a daughter-in-law, whose son and husband, respectively, has died in a war, and they are left to fend for themselves. Now, the older woman needs the younger woman to survive, just to get the basic food and stuff in. They actually have a tendency to go out and kill roaming samurai warriors that are finding their way back from the battle. They throw their bodies into a pit, strip them of their belongings, and then sell them in return for food. One day a man comes into the life and starts to upset this balance. He's got his eyes on the daughter-in-law, and the mother, fearing that she's going to lose this source of income, devises a scheme to keep her daughter-in-law from straying. She finds a mask of a terrifying demon and goes out into the fields and interrupts the daughter-in-law when she's on her way to make these rendezvous by appearing in the field with this mask on and basically scaring the bejesus out of her. There is a comeuppance at the end of this film, of which I won't give away, but let me just say this. For those of you who like The Exorcist, and you'd be a fool not to, I personally think it's probably the greatest American horror movie ever made. William Friedkin cites specifically Onibaba as being his influence for making The Exorcist. You actually see kind of an imitation of the mask in the dream sequence that Father Karras has. There is a flash of an image, and the inspiration for that is the mask that's used in Onibaba. So not only in its own right is this a wonderful film, but also in terms of the film that it helped inspire, that being The Exorcist. Our next stop is going to be Italy. Believe it or not, of all the countries in Europe to really invest themselves in the horror genre, it would be Italy, turning out the first horror films after World War II. Beginning with a film called I Vampiri. The filmmaker responsible for I Vampiri is Mario Bava, who would go on to become the king of Italian horror. Mario Bava would also introduce a whole new subgenre to the horror category, that being the giallo thrillers. These were more thrillers, mystery stories with elements of horror in them. Giallo is the Italian word for yellow. That comes from the color of the paperback novels that all of these mystery thrillers were published originally as. He started in on this new genre, if you will, in 1963 with a film called The Girl Who Knew Too Much. He raised the stakes significantly in his subsequent film, Blood and Black Lace. And by the time the 60s got to the end of the decade, practically everybody in Italy was making these giallo films. It got to the point where Mario Bava said, enough is enough. Basta, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to make the giallo film to end all giallo films. It's going to be so outrageous and ridiculous that it's going to put an end to the genre itself. He would produce a movie in 1971 called Twitch of the Death Nerve, and it did anything but end the genre. In fact, all of his great plans and ambitions to finally put it to rest would actually give birth to the slasher genre that we know and love so well over here in this country. If you have the chance to see Twitch of the Death Nerve, and I hope you will, notice the similarities. Practically every murder in that film is recreated in Friday the 13th. So go check out the original. Now, while we're still in Italy, following Mario Bava, the king of Italian horror, let's go to the prince of Italian horror, that being Dario Argento. He also started off his career by making films in the giallo genre, but really what audiences know him most for is his 1977 film Suspiria, starring American actress Jessica Harper, as a young girl who joins a ballet academy and soon finds out that it's really home to a coven of witches. When I first saw this film at the age of 17, I was just under 17. I actually had to lie to get into the movie theater, and I was so happy to be seeing this film. And after the first 20 minutes, all I wanted was for the movie to be over. I had never seen anything so horrifying in my entire life. Suspiria, definitely check it out. Another recommendation from Italy is Cemetery Man by Michele Soavi from 1994, starring Rupert Everett as the caretaker of a cemetery where the dead have a really bad habit of coming back to life. But this film is not just a simple zombie story. It goes into metaphysical regions that are just unbelievable. A really beautiful, surreal expression. The art direction, just stunning, superb. Not only do you get visceral jolts in this film, you actually think. It's a wonderful film, a combination of humor, action, horror, gore. What more could you ask for? Cemetery Man. As I mentioned to Rico, I grew up listening to tales from my Irish grandmother, so you can only imagine that ghost stories especially are near and dear to my heart. That being said, there's one film which just is so superior to anything around it. The 1961 The Innocents, starring Deborah Kerr. This is actually based on a short story written by Henry James called The Turn of the Screw. Henry James was a leading American writer at the turn of the 20th century. His brother, William James, was not only the father of American psychiatry, but also the first president of the American Paranormal Society, intent on proving whether or not there was life after death. The Turn of the Screw was a story that Henry James wrote in honor of his brother William, and it's a wonderful tale indeed. Deborah Kerr plays a governess in charge of two children who may or may not be possessed by the ghosts of the former governess and the stable hand. Is this all in her mind? Is it just a case of suppressed sexuality, or are the children, in fact, really possessed, and the love is carrying on from beyond the grave? Watch The Innocents and find out. Another wonderful ghost story, this time from 1980 from Canada, is the movie The Changeling, starring George C. Scott, a recently widowed musician. He lost his wife and his daughter in a horrible car accident, moves into this old mansion while he is teaching music at this nearby university, only to discover that he is not alone, that there is actually the ghost of a young boy haunting the house. He must try to solve the mystery as to why this child's spirit remains and hopefully free him into the afterlife. This, I think, is one of the most intelligent and frightening of all ghost stories ever made. The Changeling from 1980. And a third ghost story to throw out your way, and this is kind of a ghost story and also a story dealing with the internal mind and the madness. It's a film from South Korea from 2003, the movie A Tale of Two Sisters. Two young girls and an evil stepmother living in this house together and haunted by these misdeeds from the past. I don't want to give away too much of this story. There was a horrible American remake made recently called The Uninvited. Whatever you do, don't see it. Go once again to the original source material, A Tale of Two Sisters from South Korea. Speaking about films that deal with the inner mind, which is really my favorite subject as well, going and exploring the psyche and finding those dark corners and recesses, two films really stand out for me in that particular realm of the genre. The first being Roman Polanski's The Tenant from 1976. Shot in France, in Paris, Polanski stars himself as a young man who moves into this apartment building where the previous occupant, a young woman, had committed suicide. And he soon finds himself slowly turning into this previous occupant. Is it all in his mind? Or are the neighbors conspiring in some demonic sense to turn him into this previous tenant? Watch the movie, decide for yourself. It's a winner. And speaking about the inner mind, probably one of the most unsettling films I ever saw as a child was the movie The Other from 1972, not to be confused with The Others with Nicole Kidman. This is a much earlier film, a much simpler story. Two young boys growing up in the country around the turn of the century, and they are involved in playing these mental mind games, and they can actually project themselves into other bodies, if you will. Again, this is a movie that I can't reveal too much of without giving away the story, but treat yourself to it. It stars Uta Hagen, who was the star of the Broadway stage, the teacher of many of our finest actors. She's making her first motion picture appearance in this film. It's not to be missed. It was based on a best-selling novel by Tom Tryon. I promise you, The Other is going to be one of those films that just gets under your skin and will never leave. And now finally, to round off our list of 13 unique horror films, I'd like to leave you with two in particular. The first one being from France, 1959, a little gem called Eyes Without a Face. France had long denied that they made horror films. It was a genre they wouldn't touch. That's so different from the movies that they're turning out these days. Films such as High Tension or Martyrs or Frontiers, really pushing the envelope in terms of gore and violence. Let's go back to a simpler time. Their very first entry into the genre would be Eyes Without a Face, directed by Georges Franju. This is a beautiful little tale, I can honestly say that, with a lot of surreal elements to it. The story of a doctor who's responsible for a car accident that disfigures his daughter, and now he's intent on trying to find a new face to replace the one that she lost, regardless of how many victims it might take. Eyes Without a Face, a carnival atmosphere, a surreal, fun-like ride to it. It is going to burn images into your consciousness that will stay with you forever. And now my final film to recommend is a film that has actually made its way to my top 10 list of the greatest films ever made. And that is a work coming out of Mexico by the filmmaker Alejandro Jodorowsky, a Chilean surrealist who would bring us the masterpiece Santa Sangre in 1989. This film is about a young boy whose parents both work for the circus. He grows up in that environment. A terrible murder takes place, causes him to lose his mind, get put into an insane asylum. He escapes from it a few years later, back on the street, seemingly a normal person, but how can he be after the scarring from his childhood? You have never seen a motion picture like Santa Sangre, regardless of genres. This movie is compelling in every aspect, from its art direction, its incredible cinematography, and a kick-ass soundtrack, if I can say that on the air. Santa Sangre, one of my all-time favorite films. I know it's going to be a treat for you as well. So I hope you'll have a chance to check out any or all of these 13 films, and may they find a way into your subconsciousness, into your very soul, and may they stay with you for the rest of your lives.